Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next BBC Sherlock episode review. This one's going to be for Season 4, Episode 3, the final problem. I was just about to say the Lying Detective. The last episode of this season, and what I suppose could potentially be the last episode of Sherlock, but I really don't think that's the case. I think there's definitely going to be more, whether it be a season 5 of 3 episodes or they just do more kind of one-shot episodes like the Abominable Bride. I still think we'll get more. So anyway, let's focus on the episode. The final problem. Once again, I kind of had to watch the episode a second time before I really fully formed an opinion on it. I think the show is just in that kind of situation now where you get something out of watching it the first time, but you really have to watch it the second time to fully understand the episode. And that is a plus, but it's also a minus to the episodes in that it is required, I think, that you watch the episode a second time just to get that understanding of what's happening. Like, just the confusion behind like some of the twists kind of altering how the whole episode works, and you kind of needing to go back and rewatch and kind of understand like, oh, in this scene he's actually talking to this character because this reveal happens later on, and so on, like that. I think the writers are in this situation right now where they, as I said before, I think they've kind of run low on ideas for like amazing deductions. So they have to make up for that by just having twists happen. And the mystery is interpreting the episode in the way they've presented it, as opposed to actually a mystery in the show that the characters are figuring out. Now, we got some interesting deductions here within this episode, and it kind of had that structure of it being more of just, it's an episode focusing on a case rather than trying to have like a ton of drama happening in the background at the same time as like we're dealing with this, as the same time we're dealing with this. Instead, it was like pretty much just solid. Who is Euros? What's the situation that's happening here? And let's solve it. And as a kind of related plot point to this, like what's the backstory of this and all this sort of stuff. So I suppose that the first talking point is Euros herself. I I still find it difficult to get a read on what exactly they were going for here. I think part of it was just the presentation style for her, and the fact that in the end they revealed that she kind of sort of had this kind of dual personality, or like she primarily was so kind of focused on all of this stuff that she was doing all these bad things, but then there was just like some subconscious aspect of her that was kind of more childlike, that kind of got out her kind of true feelings, the slight hint of emotion that she had coming out, and the reveal at the end that fundamentally like it was just that she was kind of lonely and basically wanted to play with Sherlock, and she approached kind of doing that by like, oh, the only way to get Sherlock's attention is to play a game with him, have a case kind of happen and have him interact that way. Whereas in fact I suppose deep down what she wanted was, in the past, she wanted someone who she could play with. She wanted a friend in the past. I like that connection. I feel they probably could have hit it home a little bit harder. Instead they kind of were relatively vague, but like really quickly like suddenly revealing that like, oh, the girl on the plane wasn't there the whole time. That was just this other side of Euros the entire time, kind of getting her true feelings out about how she feels. That the metaphor of her dream feeling like she is alone in an aircraft that's kind of off course, that there's people around her but no one will interact with her, that she is alone even though she's around people. In the end, I liked that. It just I felt like there was just a certain lack of clarity that kept it from just being like a really amazing character arc. Instead, it was just like a lot of the stuff with the writing in this season. It's just a little muddled, that a little unclear. That it requires like multiple watchings to fully grasp everything. In that, I really feel a lot of people will come into this episode kind of mixed on Euros. Like, you have a couple of kind of key points presented about her, but you'll still be like, okay, well, this and happened, and then this, but we're meant to feel this way. Like, ultimately, like, you are asked to somewhat have sympathy for her as a character at the end, because the core of her loneliness being kind of what kind of ultimately led her to do all of this. But at the same time, what she had, like, Sherlock, Mycroft, and John do within this episode in terms of the death of the governor, the death of the governor's wife, and everything else that basically that she did, it's kind of hard to, like, reconcile a lot of that. In terms of Avatar, which obviously is the main focus of my channel, it's a situation like with Azula. Like, a lot of people with Azula are like, she is a very villainous character who is ultimately in the situation where she has these kind of issues with people and kind of somewhat mental problems. How far do you go down the road of, like, feeling sympathy for a character like this? In terms of, like, is the show asking us to fully redeem her from all of the bad stuff that she has done, or not? And I think it's similar here in that it is hard to kind of contrast the very end of the episode with some of the stuff at the start with what she forces them to do, versus at the end to kind of see this as a somewhat like emotional kind of, like, somewhat touching scene of, like, Sherlock constantly going to visit Euros and kind of gradually kind of helping her to find connections with people via playing the violin with her, and that kind of being her having a friend, you know, quote unquote, for the first time. That Sherlock, who I don't know if they were trying to imply just ignored her, or just her general personality and who she was, not being the way she was, being this genius who didn't have maybe the social skills or the emotional skills, that it just was never going to happen in their past, that Sherlock was going to hang out with his sister as a friend. Or were they actually trying to say that Sherlock ignored her? I think it's more just on her side that it just happens to be an aspect of, like, because she was, like, this high above the other two in terms of, like, Mycroft is a genius, but he has this, like, hint of emotion with how he cares about Sherlock, and ultimately, I suppose, how he, in the end, you know, sort of saw how much John meant to Sherlock and was willing to kind of sacrifice himself to that extent. That he has even though he comes across as, like, the most kind of cold of all the characters, he has that core to him as well. Sherlock this season has especially been presented as a character who is still a genius, but has a much more emotional aspect to him, and they're pointing that out a lot more. And the episode, I think, did a good job of highlighting that, like, okay, like, emotions aren't a bad thing, in that ultimately Euros, like, the way she is because she fundamentally doesn't understand a lot of these emotions, that she doesn't have them. And so what made her so villainous in the early aspects of this episode was the fact that she used basically people close to her as an experiment to understand emotions and, you know, get the context behind, like, why that is. And she basically used Sherlock as her main example of that, and that, like, oh, look at this, let's see how you interact with your friend when you're in this situation and this situation, to kind of try and understand. It's just an interesting kind of thing that they're asking the audience to kind of do with this point. And I ultimately like that in the end it was just like, she will never be allowed to get out of here. That it's just that's how kind of deep her kind of psychosis goes. That she may somehow begin to connect with that more emotional side to herself, but she's always going to, on that other side of herself, just that the genius is at such a high level that it's kind of morphed into this case, and that, like, I think it's like Sally in the very first episode of Sherlock kind of mentions that she expects at some point Sherlock will be the one who's committing the murders rather than doing it, because that's the way she sees his kind of detached style, whereas that is exactly kind of a description of Euros to a degree, that her kind of genius went to the point of, like, yeah, she kills people to learn stuff about people, to get an understanding of people's emotions. Yeah, like, I think ultimately, like, interesting character in that, like, the plan that she created was interesting, but it was one of the most absurd things that this show has also ever done. This idea that she can talk to people and program them and hypnotize them, and to the degree that she did it, where, like, she somehow managed to talk to one person, hypnotized them to get someone else to come into her, hypnotize him, get someone else to come in, to the point where she'd programmed everyone within the facility to basically listening to her as like their leader, and had like the facility changed to the point where it had all these like secret doors, and the glass was replaced, and she could plan all of this stuff and just leave whenever she wanted. Like, I get you want to establish a character as like a super genius level intellect, but like, even for this show, that felt like completely over the top. It ultimately led to some really interesting scenes that were all, like, I think fascinating, just to see them interact. The idea that the three of them are left in there with the governor and a gun, and they're basically like, Sherlock, choose John or Mycroft to kill the governor, or I'll kill the governor's wife. And in the end, none of them can do it. He commits suicide, but that's not good enough because she asked them to do something specific, so she kills the governor's wife anyway. The Garadev brothers, like, solve this crime. Condemn person. When all three people are right here, solve the crime, and the person that you are convinced did the crime will die at this point in time. Like, the results of you solving a crime, how will you actually go about solving it once you know that once you find out who did it, that person will die? And how she reversed it and actually killed the other two, and then killed the third one. It was just like, to me, it doesn't matter. It didn't feel any different to me killing innocent people compared to killing the guilty person. It's just, as she kind of mentions earlier on in some of her dialogue, that like, the idea of good and evil are just kind of like constructs. Like, if you really think about it, killing a person is just killing a person, and it's just a really like unusual, so detached way of thinking about it that like not even Mycroft or Sherlock would go anywhere near that sort of like way of thinking about things. So I like that. And then like the more emotional scenes, of course, were the I love you room and that scene with Molly. Now ultimately I think this scene suffers a little bit because Molly just hasn't been in the show a lot recently, and I know, like, I watched it with my two sisters, and like we were all just kind of there wondering like, why is Molly so annoyed? Like, she says, like, prior to the conversation, like, not necessarily related to Sherlock, that she's not in a good mood today. So like, it just felt like, could we have some context really behind like Molly and why exactly she's like this? And then it's just purely the fact that Sherlock and Molly haven't interacted in a decent bit, that the scene didn't hit home as hard as it perhaps should have. It was still really, really powerful, and it linked into some of the earlier stuff from like season 1 and stuff like that. In terms of like Sherlock knowing that Molly feels this way about him, and having to actually have a real conversation with her to get to the point where she would say that to him, and her kind of finally kind of saying like, are you just joking with me? Because she knows that, I suppose to some degree, he cares about her, but not necessarily romantically, because obviously we're still clueless really about like Sherlock's kind of romantic feelings to like any character. But I liked how she basically said, like, I'm not saying that you say it first, and how it was a struggle for Sherlock, but he eventually did say it. But in the end, it's a really confusing scene, because like they touch on Molly at the very end. She's in the montage and seems happy, but I feel like this is something they need to follow up on. Like, almost purely for this Molly scene, they have to have another episode to just address what that relationship is at this point in time. Did Sherlock manage to explain away the situation that was going on, why he made that call, or what? Because I like the idea of like when it ended and he just like was so angry about what he was forced to do that he just kind of punched the coffin and kind of ruined it. Because it kind of spoke to this idea of like, no, Molly didn't die. She was never actually in danger of dying. But what I was looking for here, like Euros, is like, I wanted to see how you and her would react given like the nature of your relationship, and what you forcing her to say this and you basically saying it back to her means, knowing that like you're realistically never going to pursue this relationship, and it's just this idea of like she just messes that up. And then like there's obviously the big scene of like one bullet left, Sherlock, you have to kill John or Mycroft. And I think this was one of Mycroft's best moments in terms of the acting and just in general as a character, in that it was this big moment of like, you initially think like, oh, he's acting like Mycroft. Of course, he wants to save himself. But then, just a couple of seconds later, you realize, just before Sherlock says it, that he's doing this to basically kind of get Sherlock a little bit angry, a little bit emotional, so that it would make it easier for Sherlock to pull the trigger and kill Mycroft, because he actually is fine with Sherlock choosing John over him. In part because he feels like he made this mess with the Moriarty situation, but also because he understands the importance of John and is kind of willing to make this sacrifice. It was a nice moment to have, and just in general, Mycroft being such a big part of this episode, I think really helped to carry his character along a lot more and understand him a bit better, and that you see some of the more emotional aspects come out. As far as the Moriarty stuff goes, I knew basically immediately upon like seeing that Moriarty scene with the music that, okay, this has to be a flashback, because they mentioned the whole Christmas treat before, and so I think it made pretty obvious sense that, like, given what Euros had said previously, and that, like, I was given this thing from Culverton, which was Faith's, by a mutual friend who was clearly Moriarty to some degree, or something like that, because there was a time skip, and just, you know, it made sense that it would be some sort of flashback moment. So I didn't really, for any degree in this episode, think Moriarty was alive. I liked how they used him in that there's just this implication that, like, prior to his death, he was already interested in Sherlock and just kind of made the decision of just like, okay, I don't care if I die or anything like that. I am perfectly fine with recording all of this stuff to just mess with him at a point after I'm dead. That does just, I exist in my life to torture him, but even after I'm dead, to torture him as well, and that's all I care about. I don't care about dying or anything like that. That you using me, Euros using the memory of Moriarty, can get to Sherlock. That was interesting. Again, the absurdity of just the fact that they come up with this whole plan within 5 minutes, and it's a bit like, could you have shown us their conversation a bit more, like explain a little bit more about that, but it is what it is. So yeah, there's that. Next, I suppose, bit was just like the transition from that, like how he gets out of it, like by basically going to commit suicide himself. That he kind of uses Euros' kind of tactics against her. Like, I think previously, like Mycroft asked for a countdown timer, and then she's like, no, I won't give you the countdown timer because I won't get like what I'm looking for here, because you will probably just last second like do it out of a reaction to the countdown timer. So you see Sherlock use the countdown timer, and then like she's suddenly the one panicking, because she this whole aim isn't to kill Sherlock, it's to kind of challenge him, like take away his best friend again, and kind of like challenge him in that way. But then like the final section of the episode, when like the scene transitions to being outside the Holmes family home, was interesting how they used the kind of funny graves to kind of create the puzzle of like Euros and I suppose her true feelings coming out, and the solution being that Euros was Euros, but also the girl on the plane as well. That fundamentally was this task of just getting someone to save her. That she needed someone to love her, and you know, so she wouldn't be alone anymore. Like it was emotionally done, given that like this was the point that they chose to reveal the whole Redbeard thing and connect it to John, and that like, is this going to be Sherlock losing his best friend again after the reveal of that Redbeard wasn't a dog. Redbeard was his friend Victor that he played pirates with, and Redbeard was his name in their game, and Sherlock was Yellowbeard. And John is in the same well that Victor was killed in by Euros, because they find his the bones of Victor there. It was a very powerful reveal in that they established basically that it was the death of Victor and like what happened, the mystery surrounding that he didn't know what happened, that changed Sherlock from being a fairly emotional kid, maybe not the brain box that we know him as now, to being more like, somewhat more like Mycroft, and being the way he is, that he doesn't remember all these things, and kind of it connects all this stuff about why he sees like running water and stuff like that, and that was, I think, well done, and it is overall like a pretty solid ending to the episode. As for the wrap up stuff, I like the whole idea of Mary sending another like DVD, and just kind of her narrating the ending as they fix up 221B Baker Street. You kind of see that like things are getting back down to normal, that at a base level, what it brought together was just the idea that like fundamentally what this show is about, and we're transitioning away from I suppose a lot of the drama stuff, that this show is about John and Sherlock, their friendship, that I actually like that they didn't in any way really try to kind of go for the John and Sherlock romantic relationship that a lot of people were perhaps expecting. I like that they didn't go for that because I think at a base level that is what the show is about. It's about one of the greatest, friendships in fiction, that being John and Sherlock, and them just keeping it as that, and just establishing like all these little things. Like Greg has his line of just like, yep, he is a good man now. He's great, but he's also good. I like them bringing that kind of full circle, and just kind of like ending it in that way with the kind of montage with that Sherlock is going to visit Euros, that through the music he can make this sort of connection with her, and she's not alone. The family is allowed to go visit her, and potentially over time there could be some sort of a connection made. She'll never be released, but they can at least connect with her. I like that. So overall, this episode, season 4, obviously this episode I think was overall pretty good. It just suffered from some of the similar problems that we've encountered in recent episodes of like them presenting the plot in a very kind of confusing way, like requiring a second rewatch, and like being overly dramatic, and like I suppose maybe not trusting themselves enough to just do straight up deductions or just kind of have character development and like reveals come out on their own without like huge twists. I think the Sixth Thatchers, the first episode of this season, does really stand out as like just really low compared to the other ones. It's still okay, like interesting to watch, like most of the episodes of this show are. It's just, it really, I think they'd missed the mark and just presented us a lot of stuff that like basically relied on episode 2 to just get us out of those bad situations. I think overall, like if you just rewatch all 3 of these episodes in a row, the season like comes together quite nicely. And as much as I have issues with the show for like the last 2 or 3 seasons really being overly dramatic and like everything's life and death, everything's a huge reveal, targeting Sherlock, someone's gonna die, I think we are finally past the most of that happening really within the show. We're finally, I think, at a stage now where we can have like whatever episode comes next, and it can just be a case. Once it's kind of well written and once it's like somewhat interesting, you can just have a case next episode and just have the characters in a good mood, not arguing with each other, just bouncing off each other. And Sherlock is obviously in a slightly different position here with his emotional development. You can do some very interesting things going forward. So especially if you like time skip and like potentially have like Rosie be a little bit older, you can, if it's going to be 2 or 3 years before the next episode, you could, I think you could pretty easily just kind of say maybe it's 5 or 6 years and have Rosie maybe just be a kind of young actor presence on screen or something like that. You can play up some interesting stuff going forward now that you're in a position where it's not life and death every single episode. So the ultimate, I think, takeaway from this is just that we can finally have a situation where we can just go back to like detective solving a case and not life and death every single time. So yeah, that's been the review for 403, The Final Problem. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on the episode and my review. But yeah, I'll just end by saying thanks for watching and bye.